It's common courtesy to remove your feet, bag, or coat from an empty seat when public transportation becomes crowded, allowing others, especially elderly or disabled passengers, to find a place to sit. For many, this basic consideration is second nature, but for one teen in Los Angeles, it became a lesson learned the hard way. What began as an everyday violation of train rules escalated into a viral incident that sparked outrage and debate. The incident not only raised questions about public transportation etiquette, but also drew scrutiny to the actions of the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD. Some hailed the officers' actions as necessary, while others condemned them as excessive. But what really happened that day, and was the officers' response justified? Bethany Nava, an 18-year-old high school senior, was riding the Metro Red Line train in Los Angeles. The train was crowded, with several passengers standing due to a lack of available seating. Despite this, Nava had her feet propped up on an adjacent seat, blocking others from using it. The Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, tasked with enforcing the Metro's passenger code of conduct, had dispatched officers to patrol the train. One of those officers was an LAPD sergeant who noticed Nava's violation of the code. The rules clearly prohibit placing feet or shoes on seats or furnishings, which Nava was blatantly disregarding. The officer approached Nava and asked her to remove her feet from the seat. This was a simple request meant to uphold the rules and ensure other passengers could sit. However, instead of complying, Nava chose to ignore the officer's order. According to witnesses, some of whom began recording the encounter, the officer asked Nava multiple times to get off the train. Her refusal left him with little choice but to enforce the Metro's policy, which includes ejecting passengers who violate the code of conduct. In a video clip that quickly circulated on social media, the officer can be seen motioning for Nava to stand up and leave the train. "I already told you what to do, and you didn't," the officer said firmly. "You disobeyed me. You're getting off the train." Nava, however, refused to comply. She remained seated with her feet on the seat and continued to argue with the officer. In her mind, she had paid for her ride and felt entitled to stay, despite the officer's instructions. Her resistance soon escalated the situation, prompting the officer to take more drastic measures. The video shows the officer reaching for Nava's arm, physically trying to remove her from the train. This is where things took a sharp turn. Instead of cooperating, Nava resisted further, pulling away from the officer and protesting loudly. "Stop! Let me go!" she shouted, as the officer tightened his grip. "I paid to be on this train," she continued to argue, but the officer persisted in his efforts to eject her. As the struggle continued, Nava's protests grew louder. "You're pulling me off the train! I can't get my stuff!" she exclaimed, visibly upset. However, the officer remained resolute, determined to follow through with the ejection as per the Metro's regulations. Nava was forcibly removed from the train and escorted onto the platform, where the confrontation didn't end. What followed was a series of events that would spark a heated debate across social media and beyond. After being removed from the train, Nava was pinned against a platform wall by the officer, who had called for backup. By this point, a small crowd had gathered, some of whom voiced their support for Nava. In the video, voices can be heard telling the officer it's not a big deal, to es, and pleading with him to stop. Others were more confrontational, with one person shouting, "Are you kidding me right now?" Nava herself was growing increasingly emotional. Her initial defiance had given way to tears, and she began crying as the officer held her against the wall. "This is not fair," she whimpered. "You took me off the train because I had my foot there because I was comfortable like that." The crowd's frustration only seemed to embolden Nava, who once again began cursing at the officer, calling him an asshole and accusing him of unfair treatment. The officer, however, remained professional and tried to de-escalate the situation. But as more bystanders joined in, tensions escalated, and the officer was forced to restrain both Nava and another passenger, identified as 22-year-old Selena Lechuga, who had begun heckling him. Lechuga's involvement added fuel to the fire. As she hurled expletives at the officer and accused him of racism, she claimed that he was targeting Nava to meet an arrest quota. "This is racism," Lechuga shouted, playing the race card and insisting that Nava was being unfairly treated. Lechuga's accusations didn't stop there. As tensions peaked, she spat at an officer, prompting the police to handcuff her as well. Both women were taken into custody, with Lechuga continuing to yell profanities as they were led away. The incident may have started with a simple violation of the Metro's passenger code of conduct, but it soon became a flashpoint for larger discussions about respect, responsibility, and how we interact in public spaces. At the heart of the controversy is a question of common decency. Public transportation is a shared space used by people of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life. For many commuters, the simple act of sitting down after a long day at work is a necessity, not a luxury. When individuals like Nava put their feet on the seats, they are not only breaking the rules, but also showing a disregard for others. Public transportation vehicles are designed to accommodate as many people as possible, but space is often limited. In crowded situations, seats become precious, and blocking one for personal comfort is inconsiderate, if not outright selfish. Many riders on the Metro are dressed in professional attire, heading to or from work. Imagine paying hundreds of dollars for a suit or dress only to be forced to sit where someone's dirty shoes have been. It's not just a matter of personal comfort. It's about maintaining the cleanliness and respect for shared spaces that everyone deserves. Nava's failure to recognize this simple truth was the catalyst for the entire altercation, and her actions could be seen as a reflection of a larger problem with entitlement and lack of respect in society today. While the public outcry largely centered around whether the officer's actions were justified, it's important to consider the legal framework that governs public transportation and the conduct of its users. The Metro's 28-page Customer Code of Conduct, which outlines specific behaviors that are prohibited, was the primary document cited in the aftermath of the incident. According to this code, placing feet or shoes on seats is considered disorderly conduct, and such behavior can result in a passenger being ejected from the train. The rules are not arbitrary. They are in place to ensure the safety, comfort, and accessibility of public transportation for all passengers. They also aim to maintain a certain standard of cleanliness and respect for shared property. In crowded urban environments like Los Angeles, where public transportation is heavily used, these rules become essential in regulating behavior and preventing conflict. When Nava refused to comply with the officer's request to remove her feet from the seat, she was not just ignoring a polite suggestion. She was violating a clear rule set by the Metro. The officer, therefore, had the legal authority to ask her to leave the train. When she continued to resist, the officer had to make a judgment call on how to enforce the rule. This brings us to the often debated question of reasonable force. Under California law, police officers are permitted to use a reasonable amount of force to enforce lawful orders and maintain public safety. In this case, the officer judged that Nava's refusal to comply warranted her physical removal from the train. Whether or not the level of force used was appropriate became a subject of debate. But legally speaking, the officer was within his rights to take action. Additionally, police are often placed in difficult situations where they must balance enforcing the law with maintaining public trust. In this instance, the officer's primary goal was to ensure that Nava complied with the Metro's rules, but the public's reaction suggested that many felt the situation was escalated unnecessarily. The incident quickly went viral after multiple bystanders shared videos of Nava's ejection from the train on social media. Within hours, the footage had been viewed by thousands, sparking a range of opinions. Some viewers were quick to criticize the officer, calling his actions heavy-handed and disproportionate to Nava's relatively minor infraction. Others sympathized with the officer, pointing out that Nava's behavior, her refusal to follow simple rules, was ultimately the cause of the escalation. Media outlets, including the LA Times and Daily Mail, picked up the story, giving it further attention. Headlines often focused on the question of whether the officer had gone too far, and some reports emphasized Nava's claims that she had only placed her heel on the seat's edge, rather than fully occupying the seat with her feet. Her mother echoed these statements, asserting that her daughter had been unfairly targeted and had suffered a sprained wrist during the altercation. However, Nava's claims were complicated by the fact that she had contradicted her mother's account in a separate interview, admitting that she had placed her feet on the seat. This inconsistency further fueled the debate, with some accusing Nava of playing the victim to deflect blame. Regardless of the conflicting accounts, the incident had struck a nerve in the public consciousness, raising questions about the role of police in enforcing minor infractions and whether the officer's response was proportionate to the situation. Social media played an instrumental role in how the incident was perceived. In the age of smartphones, incidents like these are often captured on video and shared online, where they are dissected and debated by millions of viewers. The ability to record and instantly upload footage has given the public unprecedented access to real-time events, but it has also led to the phenomenon of trial by social media. The video of Nava's ejection from the train was no exception. It quickly went viral, and comments poured in from people on both sides of the debate. Some users expressed outrage at what they saw as police brutality, while others supported the officer's actions, viewing Nava as a symbol of entitlement and disrespect for public spaces. The fact that social media allows people to weigh in on such incidents without fully understanding the context often leads to polarized discussions. One of the major issues with videos like the one involving Nava is that they rarely capture the entire story. In this case, the footage began after the officer had already asked Nava to remove her feet from the seat multiple times. Without seeing the full context of the interaction, viewers are left to fill in the blanks, which can lead to misinterpretation. While the video showed the officer physically removing Nava from the train, it didn't capture the earlier moments where he likely tried to resolve the situation peacefully. This selective framing of events is a common issue with viral videos and can significantly influence public opinion. Incidents like this one often spark larger conversations about the appropriate use of force by law enforcement. In recent years, the actions of police officers across the United States have come under intense scrutiny, particularly in cases where individuals are injured or killed during interactions with the police. Although the Nava incident did not result in serious injury, it raised questions about whether the officer's actions were necessary, given the relatively minor nature of Nava's infraction. Some argue that the officer could have handled the situation differently, perhaps by issuing a citation or warning instead of physically removing Nava from the train. They believe that resorting to force in this instance escalated what should have been a simple interaction. Others, however, contend that Nava's repeated refusal to comply left the officer with no other option. In their view, the officer was merely doing his job by enforcing the rules and maintaining order on public transportation. This debate touches on broader issues related to policing, including the balance between enforcing laws and maintaining community trust. Police officers are often placed in difficult situations where they must make split-second decisions about how to handle non-compliant individuals. In cases like Nava's, where the infraction seems minor, the use of force may appear excessive to the public, even if it is legally justified. Nava's behavior on the train also speaks to a larger issue that many have observed in society today: a sense of entitlement. Public spaces such as trains, buses, and parks are meant to be shared by all, but they rely on individuals exercising common courtesy and respect for others. In this case, Nava's decision to prioritize her own comfort over the needs of her fellow passengers reflects a mindset that is increasingly common, especially among younger generations. The entitlement mentality can manifest in a variety of ways, from refusing to follow simple rules to expecting special treatment in public spaces. In Nava's case, her refusal to remove her feet from the seat and her subsequent resistance to the officer's orders demonstrated a lack of consideration for those around her. She seemed more concerned with defending her right to sit how she pleased than with the fact that her actions were preventing others from using the seat. This incident serves as a reminder that public spaces function best when individuals are willing to abide by basic rules of conduct. While it may seem like a small matter to some, Nava's decision to put her feet on the seat had real consequences for the other passengers on the train, many of whom were standing due to the lack of available seating. Public transportation is designed to be efficient and accessible, but that efficiency breaks down when individuals refuse to follow the rules. Nava's resistance to the officer not only escalated the situation, but also led to her being taken into custody. While the incident may have started as a minor infraction, it ultimately resulted in more serious consequences for the teenager. This raises the question of how individuals should respond when confronted by law enforcement, especially in situations where the infraction is relatively minor. In many cases, compliance with an officer's lawful order can prevent an incident from escalating. Nava's refusal to comply not only prolonged the interaction, but also increased the likelihood of force being used. By choosing to resist, she turned what could have been a brief interaction into a viral confrontation that ended with her in handcuffs. The incident involving Bethany Nava on the Metro Red Line also highlights a broader cultural divide in how different generations approach public spaces, authority, and social responsibility. For older generations, there's a strong emphasis on respect for rules, personal responsibility, and cooperation in shared spaces. Public transportation in particular has always required a level of mutual respect and adherence to social norms in order to function efficiently. Whether it's offering a seat to the elderly or keeping one's feet off the furniture, these small acts of consideration are key to making public systems work. However, younger generations have sometimes been criticized for their perceived lack of regard for these traditional values. While this perception doesn't apply to everyone, incidents like Nava's can serve as examples of a broader sense of entitlement and defiance that some believe has become more prevalent. Her refusal to remove her feet from the seat and her subsequent resistance to the officer has been seen by some as a symbol of a growing disconnect between individuals and their social obligations. In a society where people are becoming increasingly focused on personal comfort, individual freedoms, and resistance to perceived overreach by authority figures, it's easy to see how such conflicts arise. Nava's actions weren't just about her feet on a seat. They were part of a larger dynamic where personal convenience was placed above the collective good. This behavior is reflective of a cultural shift where individuals, especially in younger generations, sometimes prioritize their own preferences over the established rules and social courtesies that govern public life. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that younger generations have also led movements for positive social change, often challenging authority when they feel that rules are unjust or outdated. This instinct to question authority can be a powerful force for good, as seen in civil rights movements and other efforts to combat systemic injustice. However, when that instinct is applied to situations like this one, where the rules exist for practical reasons, it can come across as misplaced rebellion. In Nava's case, the simple act of refusing to comply with a reasonable request led to a much larger confrontation, turning what could have been a brief interaction into a viral controversy. The Nava incident also reignites an ongoing discussion about the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. In recent years, tensions between police officers and citizens have escalated across the United States, particularly in urban areas like Los Angeles. These tensions are often fueled by high-profile cases involving police misconduct or the use of excessive force, which have led to protests, calls for reform, and, in some cases, civil unrest. Against this backdrop, even minor incidents like Nava's can take on a larger significance. While the officer in this case was enforcing a relatively straightforward rule, the optics of the situation, a young woman being physically removed from a train by a male police officer, were enough to spark outrage among some observers. The fact that Nava was a teenager, combined with the visible use of force, made the incident feel disproportionate to some onlookers, even if the officer was legally justified in his actions. Public perceptions of law enforcement are shaped not just by individual interactions, but also by the broader societal context in which those interactions take place. In communities where trust in the police is already low, incidents like this one can reinforce existing narratives about police overreach and abuse of power. Conversely, in communities where police are viewed more favorably, the same incident might be seen as a reasonable enforcement of the rules. For law enforcement officers, navigating this tension can be incredibly challenging. They are tasked with upholding the law while also maintaining public trust, a difficult balance to strike, especially in situations where compliance with the law is not forthcoming. In Nava's case, the officer was likely trying to avoid an escalation by asking her to leave the train voluntarily. However, when she refused, he had to make a decision about how to enforce the rules without further inflaming the situation. Unfortunately, once physical force was used, the situation took on a life of its own, with public opinion dividing sharply along the lines of support for or criticism of the police. In the days following the incident, various advocacy groups and civil rights organizations weighed in on what had happened. Some groups expressed concern about the use of force against a young woman for what they saw as a minor infraction. They argued that police resources should be directed toward addressing more serious crimes and that officers should exercise greater discretion when dealing with nonviolent offenders. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, for example, has long advocated for police reform, particularly in cases where officers use force against individuals who are not posing a direct threat to public safety. Other organizations, however, defended the officers' actions, pointing out that public transportation systems rely on the enforcement of rules to ensure that all passengers can travel safely and comfortably. These groups emphasized that while Nava's infraction may have seemed small, her refusal to comply with the officer's lawful order left him with no choice but to remove her from the train. They argued that without consistent enforcement of rules, public transportation would become chaotic and uncomfortable for everyone involved. These differing perspectives reflect a broader debate about the role of police in society. While some believe that officers should exercise restraint in situations involving minor infractions, others argue that strict enforcement of the rules is necessary to maintain order, particularly in crowded urban environments. Both sides of this debate agree, however, that incidents like the one involving Nava are a symptom of a larger issue: the need for better communication and trust between police officers and the communities they serve.